what if I told you that modern membrane jackets and waterproofing are just a poor imitation of technologies that have been around for hundreds of years? Europeans who first arrived on the Great Plains were amazed at how the locals could spend days in freezing rain and still stay dry. They had no plastic, no rubber, no synthetic fabrics, but they conquered the elements with knowledge passed down from generation to generation. Their secret lay not in a single magical item, but in a whole system of interaction with nature that we have long forgotten.
Is the harvest secured, my wife?
Yes, the sisters will travel safely with us. Be careful with the heavy load.
These people turned smoke, fat, and tree bark into a reliable shield that was impervious to water. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how an ordinary rotten stump could save the lives of an entire group of hunters in the middle of a raging storm. Are you ready to learn a secret that will change your perception of simple clothing? The main material used by the Plains Indians to protect themselves from the rain was tanned leather, but ordinary rawhide turns into a slippery rag when wet and becomes as hard as wood when dry. To avoid this, craftsmen devised a unique chemical process that we now call suede smoking. It was not just drying over a fire, but a complex technological procedure that changed the very structure of the material at the molecular level. The leather was hung over a pit in which specially selected rotten wood smoldered, producing thick, cold smoke. The smoke penetrated deep into the pores of the cleaned hide, enveloping each fiber with special resins and aldehydes. These substances acted as both a preservative and a lubricant, preventing the fibers from sticking together after getting wet.
Feel the pliability on this.
All right, here's the real test. Look at that bead.
Impressive.
The process could last several days until the leather acquired a characteristic golden brown hue and a specific smell. The longer the smoking process lasted, the darker and more water-resistant the material became. Unlike European cloth, leather treated in this way did not absorb water, but caused it to roll off the surface in droplets. Even if the rain was prolonged and moisture still penetrated inside, the leather did not lose its elasticity and softness. After drying, such a shirt or leggings did not need to be kneaded for hours to restore their shape. This saved a tremendous amount of effort and time during a hike. The craftsmen knew that different types of wood had different effects and carefully selected the fuel for their smoking pits. The use of rotten wood was mandatory as it smoldered slowly and produced cold smoke that did not burn or damage the product. Overheating the leather could instantly destroy the results of many days of work, turning the skin into brittle parchment. Interestingly, this method of processing not only made the clothing water-resistant, but also protected it from bacteria and decay. In conditions of constant dampness, clothing made of ordinary fabric began to mold after just a couple of days, posing a threat to health. Smoked suede, on the other hand, had antiseptic properties thanks to the components of the smoke. This made it possible to wear the same clothes for months without fear of skin diseases. Water could not penetrate the dense weave of fibers, which tightened even more under the influence of moisture from the outside. The Lakota and Cheyenne Indians perfected the art of tanning to such an extent that their clothes were valued above any European cloaks. Fur traders often exchanged their woolen coats for well-made Indian shirts.
Truly remarkable work. This leather is incredibly soft.
It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world, because everyone has their own methods of protection from the rain. Where are you from? Write in the comments if you have ever used traditional methods to protect yourself from the weather and how effective they were. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your approach to warmth? If smoke protected clothing, then an even more ancient method was used to protect the body and enhance water repellent properties: greasing. Native Americans understood perfectly well that water and fat do not mix, and they took full advantage of this physical law. Bear fat, bison fat, and bone marrow were not just food, but a strategic resource for survival. Hunters often applied a thin layer of fat directly to their skin before going out in the rain or cold. The fat created an impermeable film that retained body heat and prevented icy water from coming into contact with the skin. It worked like a natural wetsuit, making it much easier to tolerate low temperatures and humidity. The sensation was unusual, but the effectiveness of this method was undeniable. In addition, shoes and the lower edges of clothing, which most often came into contact with wet grass, were generously impregnated with fat. The fat mixture was often mixed with beeswax or tree resin to create a thicker and more durable paste. This ointment was rubbed into the seams of moccasins, making them virtually waterproof for a long time. This saved the feet from getting wet, and thus saved the warrior from disease. Special attention was paid to the processing of bison hides, which were used as outer capes or blankets. The fat was rubbed into the flesh side of the hide to keep it soft and prevent moisture from penetrating. Such treated hides could serve as shelter when sleeping on damp ground. The fat prevented moisture from the soil from being absorbed into the bedding. However, the use of fat had its drawbacks, the main one being its strong, distinctive odor. This smell could give away the hunter's position to the animal, so special herbs had to be used before hunting to mask the scent. A mixture of sage or buffalo grass helped to mask the smell of rancid fat. It was a delicate art of balancing protection from the elements with invisibility. For subarctic tribes such as the Cree and Athabascan, fat protection was a matter of life and death in winter. When crossing wet snow or unfrozen streams, the fat on their feet prevented instant frostbite. They mixed fat with charcoal to reduce sun glare on their faces and protect their skin from chapping. Interestingly, the composition of fat mixtures could vary depending on the season and the animals available. Beaver fat was considered one of the most water-resistant, while deer fat was harder and suitable for rubbing into seams. This knowledge was accumulated over centuries of observing the properties of different materials. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans used not only chemistry, but also perfect geometry to combat rain. Guess how long it took to create this perfect dwelling? The tepee is not just a tent, but an aerodynamic marvel, honed by centuries of life on the open, windy plains. Its conical shape was not chosen by chance. It is ideal for water to run down without lingering for a second. But the secret of dryness inside the tepee lies not only in the slope of the walls, but also in a complex ventilation system. The main problem with any shelter with a fire inside is smoke, which in rainy weather may not escape outside, but instead spread inside. The Indians solved this problem with two adjustable valves at the top of the tepee, called ears. With the help of long poles, the position of these valves could be changed in seconds to adjust to the direction of the wind. This created a draft that pulled the smoke out even in the wettest weather, preventing rain from getting inside. Inside the tepee, there was another layer of protection, the so-called ozan, or inner lining. This piece of leather or fabric was stretched around the perimeter of the walls to human height. It created an air gap that acted as insulation and protection from drafts. Any water that could seep through the outer seams or run down the poles would drain behind this lining directly into the ground. The floor of the tepee was never flooded because the location for its installation was carefully chosen with the terrain in mind. If it was necessary to set up camp in a low-lying area, a small drainage ditch was dug around the tepee. Water flowing off the roof would fall into this ditch and be carried away from the living space. The special design of the entrance also prevented moisture from entering when the door was open. The entrance was oval and raised above the ground, and it was closed with a tight valve on the frame. People stepped over a high threshold, leaving mud and water outside. The top of the tepee, where the poles crossed, was the most vulnerable place for rain. However, proper placement of the cover and precise adjustment of the valves minimized leaks. Raindrops falling on the poles did not flow inside the room, but down a special rain cord tied to the center. During rainstorms, the fire in the tepee was lit in a special way, making it small and hot. Warm air rose, drying the cover from the inside and creating pressure that prevented moisture from penetrating. Life inside continued warm and dry, while the storm raged outside. Don't forget to like this if you are amazed by the sophistication of ancient technologies. What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of ancient buildings is not true? In the northeast of the continent, where humidity was high and it rained for weeks on end, the Iroquois built huge longhouses. Their secret to protection from endless precipitation was elm or cedar bark, which they used as a high-tech roofing material. The bark was harvested in the spring when it was full of sap and easily separated from the trunk in large sheets. Fresh sheets of bark were straightened under a stone press to make them flat and easy to lay. After drying, these sheets became hard as stone and completely waterproof. Builders laid them on the roof in an overlapping pattern, similar to modern tiles or slate. Water flowed from one sheet to another without a single chance of penetrating inside the dwelling. Instead of nails, which were unknown at the time, strong bast ropes and pressure pulls were used to secure the bark. The outer frame of poles held the roof securely in place, preventing strong winds from tearing off the sheets of bark. This structure was flexible and stable, capable of withstanding both the weight of wet snow in winter and the impact of summer storms. Particular attention was paid to the joints at the ridge of the roof, the most difficult part of any roof. The widest and highest quality sheets were laid there, often bending them over the top beam. This created a monolithic ridge that reliably protected the center of the house. If a crack appeared somewhere, it was caulked with moss mixed with clay or resin. This natural sealant expanded with moisture, sealing the hole even tighter when it rained. The house's self-regulating system worked flawlessly. Inside the longhouse, a special microclimate was always maintained thanks to several fireplaces. The smoke, rising to the ceiling, additionally smoked the bark from the inside, preventing rot and the reproduction of insects. The smoke-soaked roof served for decades without needing to be completely replaced. Even during hurricanes, the inhabitants of longhouses felt safe. The sound of rain on the bark could be heard, but not a single drop fell on the sleeping platforms. It was a triumph of the engineering ingenuity of the forest peoples. Could you build a roof without a single nail? Footwear was the most critical piece of equipment because wet feet on a hike meant a quick loss of combat effectiveness. The Plains Indians used different types of moccasins for different weather and terrain. Moccasins with soft soles were suitable for dry weather, but during the rainy and muddy season, they were useless and even dangerous. For muddy conditions, special moccasins with stiff soles made of thick buffalo hide were sewn. These soles not only protected the foot from sharp rocks and thorns, but also took longer to get wet when walking on wet ground. The sides were sewn to the sole in a special way so that the seam did not touch the ground. However, even the best leather gets wet over time, so the main strategy was to have a change of shoes. A warrior on a campaign always carried several pairs of spare moccasins with him, hidden in a dry place. As soon as the shoes got soaked through, they were replaced with dry ones at the first opportunity. Wet moccasins were never dried directly over an open fire, as the leather could shrink and harden, becoming unsuitable for wear. They were stuffed with dry grass or moss, which absorbed moisture from the inside, and dried in a warm but not hot place. Patience was more important than speed in this matter. A layer of dry grass or bison wool was often placed inside the moccasins to create an insulating layer. This insole not only kept the feet warm, but also wick away moisture if water did get inside. When the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with fresh grass. For extra protection, the top of the moccasins was rubbed with a generous layer of fat mixed with wax. This helped repel dew from the grass, which often wet the feet more than rain from above. Leggings worn over the moccasins also covered the top of the foot, acting as gaiters. The indigenous peoples of the subarctic went even further and made shoes from the paws of moose or caribou. The tubular hair of the deer had excellent water-repellent properties and buoyancy, Such shoes were indispensable when walking on wet snow. The shoes were decorated with beads and porcupine quills not only for beauty, but also to indicate status. However, in bad weather, these decorations were often covered with additional simple leather overlays. Practicality always came first. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how fire was made without matches in the pouring rain? Building a fire from wet branches in heavy rain is an almost impossible task, even for an experienced hiker. The Indians solved this problem in a brilliantly simple way. They did not build a fire from scratch, but carried it with them. The main secret was tinder hidden in a bison horn or a thick leather pouch. As a basis for carrying the fire, they used a special wood fungus, or rot, which could smolder for hours without an open flame. This smoldering ember was placed in a horn filled with dry wood shavings and closed with a wooden plug with a small hole for air access. The horn protected the precious heat from rain and wind during the journey. When it was time to build a fire, the hunter would shake the smoldering ember onto pre-prepared dry kindling. Kindling, dry moss, bird down, thin bark, was always carried under clothing, close to the body. Body heat ensured that the kindling remained completely dry in all weather conditions.
Pull harder on that side. It's slipping! Hold it! Hurry, the fire is getting wet!
To build a fire in the rain, they sought shelter under overhanging rocks or thick tree crowns. If there was no natural shelter, several people would stretch out animal skins to create a temporary canopy until the fire burned strongly enough. It was important to protect the first weak flames. Fuel for a fire in the forest was not found on the ground, where everything was saturated with water, but on trees. The lower dry branches of fir trees, the so-called webbing, remained dry even in heavy rain. The resinous wood of conifers burned hot and was not affected by moisture. The Indians knew how to build fires of a special design, for example, a hut, so that water would run down the outer logs without flooding the core. The heat from inside dried the wet logs before they even started to burn. This required skill and an understanding of the physics of combustion. In the next chapter, you will learn how an ordinary wool blanket became currency and a salvation from hypothermia. Before the advent of European fabrics, bison capes, or robes, served as the main source of warmth and protection from the elements. These were whole hides with thick winter fur, tanned to the softness of fabric. The secret to using them was wearing them correctly, with the fur inside or outside, depending on the conditions. In dry, frosty weather, the skin was worn with the fur against the body, creating an air cushion that retained heat. But in rain or wet snow, the skin was turned inside out. The thick bison hair, covered with natural fat and dust, repelled water perfectly, preventing it from seeping into the skin itself. Later, with the arrival of traders, wool blankets became incredibly popular. Thick felted wool had a unique property. It kept you warm even when wet. The wool fibers swelled, closing the pores of the fabric and creating a kind of wetsuit. From these blankets, the Indians began to sew hooded cloaks, which became a symbol of the fur trade era. The hood protected the head and neck from water, and the wide cut allowed the wearer to wrap themselves completely. It was a simple but effective adaptation of the new material. However, traditional fur capes did not become a thing of the past, as they were warmer and provided better protection from the wind. Warriors often used a combination of a wool blanket as a base layer and a leather cape on top. This layering allowed them to regulate their body temperature. An important point was that bison hide was breathable. It allowed body moisture to escape without creating a sauna effect, which could cause a person to sweat and freeze. Synthetic materials only learned to do this in the 20th century. The skins for the capes were carefully selected, with preference given to the skins of young bulls or females, as they were lighter and thinner. The heavy skin of an old bison became an unbearable burden in the rain. The weight of the equipment was always taken into account when preparing for a trip. It may sound strange, but in cold and rainy weather, the main danger was not water from outside, but water from inside. Intense movement in heavy clothing caused profuse sweating. If sweat soaked through the clothes from the inside, then when the person stopped, they began to freeze rapidly. The Indians understood the mechanics of hypothermia perfectly and knew how to combat it. The main rule was not to overheat while moving. Before starting a fast march or climbing a mountain, an experienced warrior would deliberately take off excess clothing, remaining lightly dressed. It was better to feel a slight chill while walking than to sweat and freeze during a rest. Ventilation was key. Clothes were cut so that they could be easily opened or lowered. The loose cut of shirts and capes allowed air to circulate around the body, evaporating excess moisture. The peoples of the North and Subarctic wore their clothes with the fur on the inside, but left their necks and wrists open to allow heat to escape. If it got too hot, they took off their hoods, as a huge amount of heat escapes through the head. Temperature regulation was a constant process. When stopping for a break, the first thing to do was to put on dry, warm clothes, which were stored in waterproof bags. Clothes wet with sweat were immediately removed. This required discipline, as undressing in the cold is unpleasant, but it saved lives. Natural absorbents were also used. Bundles of dry grass or moss under the clothes could absorb sweat, acting as replaceable thermal underwear. When the grass got wet, it was simply thrown away and replaced with new grass. The ability to control the pace of movement also helped to avoid overheating. A steady, measured pace allowed them to cover huge distances without losing their breath or getting covered in sweat. This was the energy-saving technique of wolf running. The best way to stay dry is to avoid getting caught in the rain. The indigenous people had phenomenal meteorological skills, reading the signs of nature like an open book. They could predict the approach of a storm long before clouds appeared on the horizon. Animal behavior was the most reliable indicator. If birds began to fly low and bison huddled together with their tails turned toward the wind, it was a sure sign of a sharp deterioration in the weather. Animals sensed a drop in atmospheric pressure much earlier than humans.
The geese are running. It's coming faster than we thought.
I've got the gear secured.
The sounds in the steppe changed before rain. Moist air conducts sound better, so audibility became unusually clear and distant. If a hunter heard sounds from a neighboring valley as if they were nearby, he knew that rain was coming soon. They watched the smoke from the fire. If the smoke rose in a column, the weather would be good. If the smoke spread along the ground or swirled, unwilling to rise, it indicated low clouds and imminent precipitation. The color of the sky at sunset and sunrise gave an accurate forecast for the coming day. A red sunset promised wind, and a pale yellow sky meant rain. The presence of halos, circles around the moon or sun, warned of an approaching snowstorm. The sensitivity of one's own body, especially old wounds or joints, also hinted at changes. Elders often spoke of aching bones as a harbinger of dampness. Plants also gave clues. Some flowers closed their buds before rain to preserve pollen, and tree leaves turned upside down, showing their lighter undersides before a storm. Knowing the forecast, the tribe could choose a sheltered place for their camp in advance, reinforce their teepees, and stock up on dry firewood. This allowed them to face the bad weather fully prepared, rather than in a panic. When the rain ended, an equally important task began: drying the equipment. In humid conditions, drying thick leather or fur was a difficult task. Improper drying could irreparably damage items, making them brittle and fragile. Inside the teepee, special poles and ropes were stretched across the top. Warm air and smoke from the fire rose there, creating an ideal drying chamber. Things dried slowly but evenly there, soaking up the smoke once again. Leather was never dried close to an open fire. High temperatures cooked the collagen in the fibers, turning soft suede into a hard shell. The process required patience and constant monitoring. Wet items were constantly kneaded by hand during the drying process. This prevented the fibers from sticking together and preserved the softness of the product. Women spent hours on this monotonous but necessary work. Special leather bags called parfleshi were used to store dry items. They were made of stiff, raw hide and closed tightly, protecting the contents from moisture and rodents. The parfleshi was a kind of ancient suitcase. Particularly valuable items, such as ceremonial feather headdresses, were stored in special cylindrical cases, which were also hung under the roof of the tepee. That was the driest place. Weather permitting, items were taken out into the sun and wind. Ultraviolet rays killed mold, and the wind blew away dust. After rain, the camp turned into a huge exhibition of clothing and skins. Spare food, especially pemmican, was stored in sewn leather bags filled with fat. This ensured that the food would remain dry and edible even if the bag itself fell into the river. Caring for equipment was a collective responsibility. Helping elders or sick people dry their belongings was considered a sign of respect and care for the strength of the entire tribe. The system of caring for belongings completed the circle of survival. Well-dried and greased clothing was ready for the next rain test, ensuring the life and health of its owner. We have seen that rain protection for indigenous peoples was not a set of random techniques, but a whole philosophy of life. They used the chemistry of smoke, the physics of fat, the aerodynamics of the tepee, and a deep knowledge of biology to create comfort where survival seemed impossible. This knowledge, gained through trial and error over centuries, commands respect even in our age of high technology. Observation and ingenuity allowed them to turn nature itself into their ally. Instead of fighting the rain, they learned to live with it, using its rhythms and characteristics. Their experience reminds us that the most reliable solutions are often the simplest and most natural. What other aspects of Native American life would you be interested in learning about? Perhaps their methods of medicine or tactics for hunting bison? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel to continue this fascinating journey into the past.